Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Cathedral of Saint Paul for a very special treat. The cathedral, of course, is part of the most historic core of our state's history. I'm not going to elaborate on that because we have the expert here. When I was rector here at the cathedral from 2006 to 2012, immediately upon my arrival, they told me that we were preparing to celebrate the centennial of the cornerstone of the cathedral. And so my first year was caught up in all sorts of planning for those festivities. And when we had that lovely celebration in 2007, we founded the Cathedral Heritage Foundation as an entity to care for the restoration and preservation of the cathedral for years to come. But we also turned to the archives. And having focused just on that one celebration of the laying of the cornerstone, which at that time was the largest single event in Minnesota history, that some 70,000 people attended the laying of the cornerstone. And maybe we're a little bit jaded because 70,000 people go to a football game now and we don't think anything of it. But in 1907, that was quite something. But as we pivoted from that celebration to looking at how do we begin to take account of the whole history of this building and to organize that, we found there was a lot of work to be done. And so I just happened to know a certain active cathedral parishioner who was a retired history professor, and I said, "Dr. Celeste Raspanti, you are drafted." And with her characteristic generosity and joy, she stepped into the archives and went to town. So at universities, and she's taught at the University of St. Thomas, at St. Kate's, at the University of Minnesota, they often have a chair in history. If we had a chair in history, it would be Celeste. So this chair that you're speaking from now, we might put a plaque on the back of it, that the official Celeste Raspanti chair of cathedral history. Celeste is approaching her own centennial at 96 years young and still sharp as a tack. And so we're so blessed that she would share with us, not just having done all of this work over the past 15 or so years, but to now, tonight, share with us viva voce, live, in person, her cherished memories of the cathedral and its importance, and then also be able to entertain any questions that you may have about this magnificent building that we are so privileged to call our spiritual home. Let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Loving, gracious Father, in this month of November, we remember all those who have gone before us. And as we prepare to celebrate Thanksgiving, we want to have hearts filled with gratitude for those whose sacrifices and labors have created this magnificent work of art that lifts our minds and hearts up to you. Help the cathedral to always continue to be a beacon of your loving presence to our community. And help each and every one of us to continue to live out our role in being your light to the world. We give thanks for Celeste and all of her hard work to preserve the history of this holy place. Bless her with continued good health and help her to share with joy all of the beautiful treasures of the cathedral's history this evening. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Saint Paul,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, you didn't come to hear me, so I turn it over to Celeste.
Thank you, Father. Before I start my comments, I'm going to give you something to think about. One day, Archbishop Ireland came into the cathedral, and it was his custom while they were building it to be here every day. He made all the decisions about the cathedral. He walked around, he looked at the workers, he talked to them, and one day he climbed up on the scaffolding where one of the workers was having lunch, and he was just taking a swig of whiskey with his lunch. And the Archbishop was well known to be very against liquor of any kind. So when the worker saw Archbishop Ireland climbing up to the where he was, he took the bottle of whiskey and he put it in some space in the cathedral. I don't know where that space is, but someplace up there, there is a half bottle of whiskey. And someday when they're cleaning the ceiling, somebody will find it. Thank you, Archbishop Ireland. You can't talk about this building without talking first about the man who built it. This was his crowning achievement. He was a good priest, he was a good manager, and like many people with his intelligence and his ambition, he had a tragic flaw, what we call in literature the tragic flaw. Shakespeare talks about that a lot. And his tragic flaw was ambition. He wanted to be a cardinal. And he had all the character. He could have been a cardinal. He was very active. He was a good manager. He was interested in things. He was very interested and knew people in Rome, and he knew people here and knew people in church throughout the United States. So he would have been a man who could have been a cardinal. But that was not to be. Unfortunately, a close friend of his, a woman who was very generous to the church, both in Rome and in the United States, went to one of her cardinal friends and said, why don't you promote John Ireland to be a cardinal? Well, of course, that was the kiss of death, that he would become a cardinal at the request of a woman. And so John Ireland never received that honor. And frankly, I'm happy, because if he had, he probably wouldn't have stayed in St. Paul. New York always has a cardinal. Chicago always has a cardinal. It's not likely that he would have stayed in the city of St. Paul, so we have him. He loved this building. This building was important to him, and he made all the decisions. Everything you see here is his decision. He made the decision to break the pews there. He made the decision where the statues would be. He made the decision where the lights would be, where the altars would be, which altar, St. Matthew, Mark, Luke, well, wherever, Luke and John. He made every single decision, and he would come and sit here and watch the workmen. And as I said, he would go up sometimes, and that one occasion that I mentioned, talk to the workmen. This was his life achievement. If you look around the cathedral, you will see little waves, and this was his decision that we are in the ship of the church, and we should be careful as the ship of the church rocks forward, and we know that Christ has calmed the waters as people. He talked about people coming into the ship when the apostles came into the ship. So this is the ship of the church, and we are in the ship of the church. Everything in this cathedral is at the suggestion or the approval of Archbishop John Ireland. And I think, as I said, we're fortunate to have him in our history. One of the things that he did, he kept the Italians in the basement. And as an Italian American, I resent that a little bit, but he said they were so noisy. Well, that's true. Italians are noisy people. But he kept the Italians in the basement for a long time, and they had Mass in the basement, and And then finally, some large group of battalions must have come into the Twin or come into St. Paul, and he brought them up. And of course, we have St. Anthony of Padua as one of our saints in the shrines of the nations, and he is a patron, one of the patrons of Italy. All right. Now, do you have any questions? Now, what I'm talking about this evening, besides the fact that the cathedral has the ship of the church, we are all these little waves that go around the ship of the church. The cathedral as a building is a safe place. If you are on the ocean and you're in a ship, you are safe. You may be shuffled back and forth. You may be the storms may rise and the storms may fall, but you're safe if you are in the ship. And of course, that's also part of what we understand about our faith. If we are in the ship of the church, if we stay in the ship of the church, we will not sink, we will not drown, we will be safe in Christ's grace. And that was important. This again was Archbishop Ireland, ship of the church. When you leave, be sure you go around and see all those little waves in that bar at the bottom of the big pillars. This was an important thing to Ireland. He wanted people to love this building as much as he did. And as I said, he came in here every day and he watched what they were doing. We have records of where where you see the end of the pews there, he would dicker with the men who designed that. Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? No, I want it this way. No, I want it that way. Every single decision in this cathedral was made by Archbishop Ireland. I suppose I'm almost sure that could be true there. He decided what saints would be here in each of the four corners, the four evangelists holding up the four corners of the church. He decided about the confessionals, what saints would be above the confessionals, and the saints here. All of this was his decision. And it absolutely absorbed his time. He would come and sit here, as I said, and watch the workers. He'd talk to them. He would discuss with them. He would suggest this, and they would say no, and he would say yes. And in the end, they would probably have to do what he said, of course, because he was in charge. He would sit here for hours. He often set his office here, set the divine office, priest divine office here, and sit way in the back and watch people come in. And this was great joy to see people coming into the cathedral and looking and wondering. It was an important part of his life, and he spent the last part of his life attending to the cathedral. And he said later in his years, as he approached death, that this was what he would be remembered for. Well, we also remember him from other things, but we certainly remember that he built this beautiful cathedral. The cathedral seats about 3,000 people if you get everybody into the pews, and it is about as long as a football field, about as wide as a football field, and as I said, seats about 3,000 people if all the pews are filled, and it has not the best sound. Probably that's because there are too many, the echo, but of course, when the cathedral was built, they didn't have the kind of microphones and the type of things that we have now, and so people probably couldn't hear everything that Archbishop Ireland said, although the records tell us that he had a booming voice, and so maybe they did here because he spoke so loudly. We're told that on the morning that the cathedral opened on Palm Sunday, 1915, it was raining. It was 6:30 in the morning, and it was raining. And think about this, 6:30 in the morning, and he came into the cathedral, and there was no sacristy at the time, so he went to the altar, he went into the sanctuary, and he was vesting in the sanctuary. And while he was vesting, he had his back turned to the congregation, and when he turned around, he saw the cathedral was filled, door to door, front to back. 6:30 on a rainy Sunday morning, everybody was here. And he stood, this always touches me so much, he stood and he wept, because exactly what he wanted the people to feel, that this was their building, this was their cathedral. He used to, as I said, sit here many days and just keep looking. Has this come about? He could hardly believe that this thing that he had wished, that he had worked for, not only wished for, but worked for, struggled in so many ways, not only financially, but in so many ways, had finally come to pass. The last day of his life, he was sitting in the cathedral, this according to his biographer, and he sat, maybe he was saying his office, he sat in the back, and his assistant came and said, "Archbishop, there's somebody who wants to talk to you." And he walked across the street, and he turned and he looked at the cathedral, almost if he felt that he wouldn't see it again, and he looked back and he said, "This is what they'll remember. They'll remember this. They will remember this." And they do. We do remember this cathedral. What a great man he was, and what a wonderful, beautiful cathedral he gave us. I've been in many cathedrals, and probably you have too. Part of the beauty of this cathedral that it stands on the hill. It's on the highest hill in the city of Saint Paul. You can see it from the freeway. You can see it across the river. If you go to St. Patrick's in New York, you have to get up to St. Patrick's to see it. If you go to Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago, Holy Name is between two. I'm from Chicago, and I'm familiar with Holy Name Cathedral, but you have to walk up to it practically to see it, because it's in between other buildings. But this is on the highest hill in the city of St. Paul. That wasn't an accident. That was Archbishop Ireland. He wanted everybody, when you are on the freeway, you'll see it. I remember one day I was flying in from someplace, it's quite a while ago, and I remember that one of the things, when the plane flies into the airport, you could see the cathedral as one of the outstanding buildings. How fortunate we are to have this beautiful, beautiful building. So many of the things in the cathedral, as I said, are Archbishop Ireland, the ends of the pews, the statues, who would go in the windows, all of that was his. And he never forgot that this building was going to be here forever. He would pass, and he did, of course, we all will, but this building will be here forever.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
We've been speaking about the end of Archbishop Ireland's life. What about the beginning? How did a little immigrant boy from Ireland who was on the frontier, where did he first encounter great cathedrals, and how did his friendship with a certain Frenchman contribute to the building of this cathedral?
Well, Ireland was born in Ireland, and he came to the United States. Actually, his family came to the United States, and he came from the potato famine in Ireland, as many Irish did, this people starving from Ireland. And he said, "I turned my back on Ireland and never looked. I turned away from Ireland and never looked back." And he never looked back. That was characteristic of him. He was not at least from what we know, he was not a person who made a big fuss about making mistakes. If he made a mistake, he said, okay, that's it, let's go on. And that's a kind of a healthy attitude, because if you let mistakes drag you down, you'll never go anywhere. You will be worn out at some point in your life. So he was, he said, if I make a mistake, pick myself up, dust myself off, and start all over again. Any other, Father?
So his time as a seminarian in France gave him a great love of all things French.
Yes.
And of those great towering cathedrals that dominate the landscape. Could you say anything about when he was planning this cathedral, how he encountered a certain Frenchman in St. Louis?
St. Masquerade, yes. And of course, because Masquerade was French, Ireland spoke perfect French. He had studied for the priesthood in France. And one time when the ambassador to from France came to meet with the President of the United States, the President, excuse me, the President actually asked Ireland to come to Washington, D.C. to be part of the welcoming and entertaining committee for the ambassador from France. He was known to be an important person, and he spoke good French, perfect French, and the President of the United States called on him. And of course, he liked that, wouldn't you? And he did very well at it. Any other questions?
Sorry to bring up a difficult subject, but Masquerades built other churches, but I don't think any of them had the roof problems that this one had. Does anybody have any history on why it is that this particular church
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
difficulty?
So the question is about the leaky roof. It was Masquerade designed this roof, and of course it leaked. A slight correction, all of Masquerade's roofs leaked.
Yes.
Every single one of them. And it has to do with climate, that he wasn't used to this climate from France. But in fact, so we won't fault Masquerade for that. But when they put the roof on, why don't you want to talk about the construction of the dome when they ran out of money?
No.
No.
You
Okay.
tell that.
All right, I'll tell that. As Celeste said earlier, Archbishop Ireland often had money problems, and so he ran out of money several times. Once it was just a complete stop, and they hadn't put the dome on yet. And so the business community of St. Paul had a big luncheon at the St. Paul Hotel, and Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish businessmen all contributed to putting the dome on the cathedral as a matter of civic pride. The Capitol had just been built right before the cathedral, and so they were very proud of their community growing and becoming more prominent, and it would have been a shame to have this unfinished cathedral dominating the landscape. So they all contributed. I met a few years ago a woman who said, yes, it's true, I'm Jewish, and my grandfather was one of those businessmen that contributed. But when they did contribute, they said it's a 50-year roof, and it lasted 50 years. And then it leaked for 40. And then finally we fixed it. But no, we knew it was going to be a 50-year roof. It was just when it started leaking, no one had the money to go up there and fix it. But we won't fault Masquerade. He's a pretty good architect.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Any other questions?
So a lot of people contributed.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
A lot of people contributed to the financial building of this cathedral. So a lot of ordinary people, but I know James J. Hill gave a lot of money to build this cathedral as well, because his wife was Catholic and he was friends with Archbishop Ireland. Can you hear me, Celeste? No.
What's the question?
So the question's about, did
did Archbishop Ireland's friendship with James J. Hill help the financing of the cathedral?
No, James J. Hill, no.
Right.
Mrs. Hill was a friend. She didn't like Archbishop Ireland. She thought he was too bossy. Well, of course he was too bossy. But she was pretty bossy herself. And she didn't like him, but of course she respected him because he was the archbishop. But she talked about him and would talk about him being across the street. And so she didn't like him, although, as I said, she did respect him.
So some people think because the Hill Mansion is right across the street, run by the Historical Society, a wonderful museum if you've never been there, people think that the Hill family contributed. Actually, downstairs in our museum, which is reopening next week, we find a little penny coin bank that was distributed to all the school children in the Archdiocese to sacrifice their pennies. And in the Founders Chapel off of the vestibule where the Pietà is our memorial volume that lists every single parish that existed at the time of the building of the cathedral and every single person who contributed from that parish down to 5 cents, right? And so the cathedral was not built by wealthy benefactors, but rather by the sacrifices of all the poor immigrants. Later, after Mr. Hill died, his children donated the magnificent baldacchino in his honor. So if you go around the back of the sanctuary, there's a Latin inscription that this high altar and baldacchino, this canopy over the altar, is dedicated to the memory of James J. Hill by his children. And the fun thing was, of course, by this time, Masqueray and Archbishop Ireland were dead, but the fun thing is they got a railway architect, the same one that worked on Grand Central Station in New York, to design the baldacchino. That Masqueray's original designs for it looked more like the twisted columns, the Solomonic columns of St. Peter's Basilica's baldacchino. But this one was done in a different way. But the angels above have the faces of the granddaughters of James J. Hill.
That's right. Yes.
So the Hill family did give an important contribution to the cathedral later, but was not poor Mr. I shouldn't say poor Mr. Hill, rich Mr. Hill, but he was much put upon by Archbishop Ireland, who had lots of schemes that often flopped, and then there was Mr. Hill writing a check to get the Archbishop out of trouble, including, as Celeste said, the location of the capital. The capital originally was thought to be located in the Midway area, halfway between St. Paul and Minneapolis, so Archbishop Ireland bought up a whole bunch of land there because he wanted the cathedral near the capital. Well, they didn't put the capital there, and Archbishop Ireland was stuck with a bunch of land he didn't need, right? So all sorts of little fiascos like that meant that the Hills were not necessarily eager to jump in on the latest, somewhat crazy project of a magnificent cathedral like this. So, good questions. There's a question back here. Someone had their hand up back here.
It was similar to the Hill. I heard that he and Archbishop, they over control of what this was going to be designed. That's why Hill never gave money.
Yeah, as the question's about control of design, and as you said, Archbishop Ireland exercised complete control over the design,
yes, yeah.
and Mr. Hill wasn't allowed any say in that, right? So, you have a question?
So, when they were going to fix the roof, how did they get up there? It's really high.
Very good question. It's a construction question about the restoration. Do you want me to take that?
Yes, would you? Yeah.
So, if you imagine the height, Celeste said it's a football field wide and deep. It's also a football field tall. So the cross on the top is 306 feet up. If you want to know how tall that is, go to a big building, get in the elevator, and look for the 30th floor, and push 30. And when you get up to that height, you'd be on eye level with the cross on top of the dome. All right? 30 stories. Now, when we in America build a 30-story building, do we have a 30-story crane? No. The crane is attached to the building as it goes up. So nowhere in the entire continent was there a crane big enough to deal with this dome. So we had to rent 2 cranes from Germany, because they have buildings that are this big, and they had to be shipped over here, rental price of $1 million a piece, and that's how we were able to get all the way to the top and do all of that. Now, at some point, on another occasion, hopefully you'll be able to go downstairs and see the timeline of the cathedral's construction and visit our museum, but there's a photo of one of the workers before the cross is put up there, standing on the tippy top like this, because when they built it, they didn't have any cranes. It just was scaffolding, but very, very dangerous, very difficult, but exciting, right? Good question.
Yep. My question is, I've been in my share of cathedrals, and this is the only cathedral I've ever been in that has this right here in the altar, the 4 or 5 domes, and then the cone. It looks like a cone shape above there and dark. And can you speak a little? I mean, it seems almost to be almost a little spooky, the darkness, and the cone shape. Could somebody speak a little bit to what was the artistic or spiritual vision of that particular part of the altar?
I didn't hear the question, Father.
So the question is about the design of the sanctuary. Do you want to say anything about the bronze grills of the baldacchino, the design? And then I think also a little question was the darkness. The darkness is because it's bronze, and bronze darkens. Just like if you look carefully at the cathedral's dome, I was pastor of our Hmong parish years ago, and the Hmong name for the cathedral has nothing to do with the cathedral. It's the big green church, right? Because the dome used to be green before it was restored. It's turning green again if you look on the outside. So, of course, metals change color over time. So one of the projects for the interior restoration will be to clean the bronze, in which case it'll become a warm goldish color again, right? So it won't be spooky at all, right? Good. But anything about the design of the sanctuary decoration that you want to speak about?
Well, of course, the cathedra is a centerpiece of not the centerpiece, but that makes this a cathedral, because that chair is where the bishop sits, and that makes this a cathedral. If you go into a church that has a cathedra, you are in a cathedral. And a part of Ireland's design of the cathedral, we have downstairs, we have the first cathedra, or it was, I don't know if it is still in the downstairs, it was in the museum. The first throne, or the bishop's chair, is downstairs in the museum. And it's less decorative than this one is. This was restored some years ago, and it's beautiful. It really is truly beautiful. Any other question?
Here. Carolyn Will from the Cathedral Heritage Foundation.
Thank you, Father Joseph. Dr. Raspanti, it's so fun to hear all of your stories. And one of the stories that I recall you telling me, I'm in public relations, that Archbishop Ireland was a master at public relations, because similar to today, we have so many different languages being spoken in the Twin Cities. And 100+ years ago, he sort of had a way to deal and communicate with all these different immigrant groups. And I was hoping you could share that story.
What was the question? I can hear.
So with all of the different groups of people, the different immigrant groups, different languages and cultures that were flooding in with the immigrants, that Archbishop Ireland was a master communicator and good at marketing.
Yeah.
Anything you want to talk about the way he would communicate his vision for what he wanted to do?
Well, part of it was that Archbishop Ireland, he was an easy person to talk to, or he was a good talker. And he went around to people, and he had that Irish thing, which is, you know how the Irish are. They're very friendly and open. And He drew people to himself. People were attracted to him. And of course, he used that to build his cathedral. He used that to get people to be generous with their contributions, to make sacrifices. If they could only give this much, if you tried a little harder, you could give more. And part of that is the genius of Ireland, who he knew that the people loved the cathedral. And if he could just inspire them to put their love in action by being generous. And of course, the cathedral, I don't know what it is now, but I'm sure it always needs money. And that was important. He was always passing the basket, so to speak. And of course, that's true of most churches. I'm sure it's true of almost all churches, yeah.
I'll tell one little story. When he was buying up the land to build the cathedral, there was an old mansion here, the Kidson Mansion, but he needed more space than that one property, so he's buying others up, trying to do it quietly, because if people knew what it was for, of course, they would jack up the prices. Well, they found out, and they did start jacking up the prices, and he didn't have a footprint large enough for how big he wanted the cathedral to be. So he found it easier to go to the city council and persuade them to push Summit Avenue out the front than to raise the money to buy up land behind. So Summit Avenue actually came closer to where the front doors of the cathedral are, and he persuaded the city to move it. So it's an amazing way that he was able to articulate a fantastic vision and get people on board with it that way.
I don't think we can ever overestimate the personality of Archbishop Ireland. He was not only an attractive personality in the sense that he had that kind of Irish thing. Irish people are easy to get along with. And he had that Irish thing, and people liked him. Not everybody, but most people did. And he used that to engage people in the work of the cathedral. And of course, here it is.
Celeste and I were privileged to be at Calvary Cemetery nearby a couple of months ago when the mayor of Kilkenny, Archbishop's hometown in Ireland, came as an official delegation to lay a wreath at the tomb of Archbishop Ireland.
I remember that.
And so it's a wonderful thing. And from his grave, you look and you see the dome of the cathedral. Mm-hmm. And his friend, the architect of the cathedral, Emmanuel Masqueret, is maybe 50 yards away. His grave is as well. And on it, a beautiful bronze plaque with the dome of the cathedral on it.
Yeah.
Because this was his last work. He died here, unfortunately, before being able to do even more wonderful things.
Yeah.
Another question.
Thank you so much, Celeste. I always had a question about his relationship with the cathedral versus the basilica. They were being constructed contemporaneously.
Yes, they were built at the same
and yet
time.
You talk about him being here every day. And so, what was his relationship? I also am just amazed that there were enough craftsmen to be working on both of these buildings at the same time in St. Paul. But what was his relationship with the basilica then, if this was his much loved?
Well, it's typical of Archbishop Ireland. He was not only going to build one church, but he built two churches. I'm not sure, but I would imagine that he visited that church as much as he could. But of course, this was the primary cathedral. This is where the cathedra was. We know from some contemporary documents that he also visited, but since this was his first one and he lived here, I can't prove it, but I think this was his preference.
And again, that was part of his forward-looking vision too. He could see Minneapolis growing, and he wanted the church to have a presence there as well. the political center of the state, but also the economic center of the state. I think there was some back here that had a question.
Took it down. I was gonna ask about the Kidson Mansion if they took it down because it was at the site of the cathedral. Did you say that it was the street was moved? Oh. Okay.
Yes, there's pictures of the Kidson Mansion that was torn down downstairs as well, but Summit Avenue out the front, because that big plaza, that huge monumental staircase that nobody walks up because everyone parks on the side, that's an acre out front. It's a whole acre out there. But anything you want to say about the Kidson Mansion, but it was torn down to make room.
Yes, they tore down the Kidson Mansion to build the cathedral. And not everybody was happy about that, but Archbishop Ireland didn't care because that's just the man he was, and aren't we lucky to have him in our history?
When he would go to Europe,
Yeah.
he would often pass through France because he'd been there. You know, our first missionaries were French, you know, and so we had Father Galtier, Monsignor Revaux, Bishop Cretin, all of these great French missionaries. So their diocese in France said, our gift to you will be to educate your seminarians for you. So that's how John Ireland landed in France and developed this love of all things French. But if he had to go to Rome, he'd pass through France. And they say that people would flock to the cathedral to hear this great American archbishop would preach for an hour in flawless French without notes. Now, can you imagine preaching for an hour, right? Anyway, but they did. He had this magnetic personality and a great eloquence.
Yeah.
Here's another question.
Celeste, can you talk about Archbishop Ireland's sister? What role she played in helping build the cathedral?
I'm sorry?
About the Archbishop's sister, Mother Seraphim.
Yeah, his sister was a sister of St. Joseph, and she was over at St. Kate's, St. Catherine's, and she, of course, idolized her brother. She used to, if you notice on the front of the eagle is there, and when she would come to Mass, she would always sit in that first pew because she would be facing St. John, who is always an eagle. There are stories about how Ireland would come and talk to the sisters, and they would sit at his feet. One of the quotations is that they would sit at his feet asking questions, and he would instruct them, and he had a very fatherly attitude toward the sisters, and of course he loved his own sister and was very close to the Sisters of St. Joseph.
She served as the Mother Provincial for the Sisters of St. Joseph for, I think, 30
right.
plus years,
Yeah.
and is buried about 20 feet away from her brother in Calvary
Yeah,
Cemetery.
yeah, I didn't know that.
All right, was there another question in the back?
I was just gonna ask if the stone choice had any meaning to it to John or to Ireland. Just there's a lot of different inlays of different stones, and I didn't know if that had a meaning.
So we love to talk about the symbolism through all the decoration, but everyone always points at these colored medallions up there, and that's the one thing that doesn't have theological significance. But those. But again, remember the inside of the cathedral was plain when Archbishop Ireland died, right? There were plans and designs and things, but it took another 40 plus years to do all of this decoration that you see. So the question is about the different stone choices. So St. Cloud granite for
Yes.
the outside, and Indiana limestone
That's right,
for the
yeah.
inside.
And part of this was he wanted to take, it slips my mind now, but there was some stone that he was interested in, but, the Capitol. The Capitol had been building, and the Capitol was built of some very beautiful stone, and it slips my mind now. And Archbishop Ireland wanted to have the cathedral built, but he was afraid that the people would not be happy about that. It should be built of Minnesota stone. So it's built of Minnesota limestone. Yeah.
So Minnesota, St. Cloud granite up there, and then the inside, the limestone from Indiana. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
This is a two-part question. He is wondering why he built the cathedral, and then he's also wondering why they made it so gold and grand.
What was the question?
Why did he build the cathedral in the first place? There were earlier cathedrals. We said this is the fourth cathedral. What was his experience on Palm Sunday in the third cathedral that led him to want to build this?
Well, it was so crowded. The Catholics were growing, and the first cathedral of St. Paul was a log cabin. That's one of our favorite stories, and I think is it downstairs? It's still in the museum. It was a log cabin, and he went from that log cabin to this. But the congregation, the Catholic congregation, was growing, and he wanted to be sure to be able to have people be able to go to Mass. So it was merely a necessity.
So 1841, Father Galtier built the first log chapel downtown, and then added on to it because people were coming, population was growing. Then there was a brick second cathedral and a brick third cathedral. But then on Palm Sunday, it was a snowy Palm Sunday, and people were spilling out of the cathedral, attending Palm Sunday Mass out on the street because they couldn't crowd any more people in there. And again, great waves of immigrants, but also its westward expansion during that time. And so it was simply, he saw that there was going to be a need. Now, if you go into the vestibule, there's a beautiful little chapel we call the Founders Chapel with the Pietas, and I told you there's where the memorial volume is, but it's called the Founders Chapel. That's where they thought daily Mass was going to be. But of course, that's for like 10 people, right? Could fit over there. But from day one, there were too many people to have Mass, daily Mass anywhere but the main sanctuary. So even for daily Mass, there wouldn't have been enough room. But he could see, and sure enough, Christmas midnight Mass, we will be standing room only again. So it's a beautiful thing that he had that vision. The other question was about why so much gold? Why so fancy? Why such a grand building?
Well, Catholics have always made their churches beautiful, partly because it's the house of God. And think of all the cathedrals, the cathedrals in Europe, Notre Dame and the beautiful cathedrals in Europe. That's been part of the Catholic tradition to make the house of God very beautiful. Notre Dame as I said, Notre Dame in France, how beautiful that is. And if you've been to France and if you've seen Notre Dame, you'll never forget that. And others also. So that's part of who we are. We build a beautiful house for God.
Right. And so the interesting thing was there was a little boy a little bit younger than you that came in once with his daddy, and he started tugging his daddy. He said, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." He said, "What? Daddy, I know that God is in every church, but this is where he really lives." Right? And sure enough, you look up, of course now it's nighttime, but the windows have angels in them, and the whole idea of this is that this is where heaven and earth meet, right? It's meant to lift us up, to remember that God is here with us, and that we are called to go up to be in heaven with him. And your sister has a question too.
So, where's that picture from, of Jesus next to the yellow flowers? Like the really old look.
The one in a square or the one in a circle? In the square. You have stumped both of us, because that was just recently added to the cathedral just before I got back, but I haven't read the history on it yet. But it is connected to the circle there. These are the stations of the cross. So So starting over here and going around, the 14 moments that we as a devotion meditate on the passion of Jesus, and they were done in a way to hearken back to the bronze grills of the sanctuary. You see how they kind of look like they're similar to that. Well, I think it was just a year or two ago, within the last couple of years, someone wanted to donate to Father Ubel for the cathedral an image of Jesus with the crown of thorns. And he thought, well, the crown of thorns is connected to the passion of Jesus, so let's put it there next to the Stations of the Cross. But I think we'd probably have to look up an old bulletin and find the complete story, and I haven't done that yet. I haven't done my homework, I'm sorry. Right? This is the archives. Oh, Mary, do you want to fill in?
Yes. Celeste, could you tell us how Archbishop Ireland came to choose Emmanuel Masqueret as the architect?
Well, I didn't hear that.
How did the Archbishop choose Emmanuel Masqueret to be the architect?
He chose him because he was French, and he had been to, slips my mind, but where he was.
The Expo in St. Louis.
That's right. He had been
100th
to
anniversary of the Louisiana Bridges.
the Expo in St. Louis, and he looked around. He said, "Who did all this wonderful exhibit, all of this?" And of course, they said, "Well, Masqueret." Well, two things. First of all, he admired what he had done, but when he found out that he was French, of course, Ireland, that was it. And he brought Masqueret to St. Paul, and Masqueret stayed here the rest of his life. He died here, yeah.
And the funny thing about that is that they had already launched a national competition for architects across the country to submit drawings, and then this committee would pick which one of those architects would be. Archbishop Ireland goes down to St. Louis, hires Masquerade, comes back and cancels the competition. All right. There were a lot of very annoyed architects.
Nobody argued with him.
Right. As Celeste said, the downstairs, what we call today the Cana Chapel, right? That was where it was used as sacristy for the cathedral, because what we know is the sacristy off the back here. That's the smaller dome with the beautiful angel pirouetting on the top of it. That was done 10 years after the cathedral, same time as the rectory was done at that time as well. That was done by the firm that really wanted this commission, right? But Masquerade had died. They didn't have money for a sacristy. 10 years later, they scraped up enough money to do the sacristy, and they hired the firm that wanted to do it. But they were obviously clearly inspired by Masquerade in order to do that. Mr. Gruntner, do you want to say anything? You have a question for Celeste or no? Any questions from this side? Yes, back here. All the way back.
I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the Shrines of the Nations. I've been to a number of different cathedrals across this country. It's totally unique. I don't think there's anything else like it. I'm wondering why these specific countries? Why is this here?
Having visited many cathedrals, she said she's never seen a Shrine of the Nations. Can you talk about why there's a Shrine of the Nations and why these particular saints?
I think the answer is Archbishop Ireland. That was his way, and also it was a way of engaging when he first had the idea about the Shrines of the Nations. He had the first one that's now for the Italians, for St. Anthony, the Augustinians, because Britain, this patron saint of Britain is St. Augustine. Well, there weren't enough English people here, so he eliminated that, and he put up St. Anthony as for the Italians. Actually, St. Francis is the patron saint of Italy, but St. Anthony, who hasn't said, St. Anthony, please find my gloves, please find my keys, right? St. Anthony is a more popular Italian saint. So we have St. Anthony in the middle and St. Francis on one side and St. Clare on the other side. And in each of those altars, he has the St. John the Baptist, St. John the Baptist, who's next? St. Patrick, St. Boniface, St.
Cyril and Methodius.
Cyril and Methodius, and the last one is Saint Therese. And all of those are, and he wanted people. One of the things I really like I like being Catholic, of course, but one of the things I really like is having saints, and having saints to pray to, and having saints to tell stories about. And so he's given us all these saints. I think that's wonderful. Yeah.
And again, this was an immigrant community. So each of these chapels are for the major immigrant groups. And again, not enough Englishmen? Okay, there are plenty of Italians, we'll do that. There were two other changes. St. Therese was supposed to be St. Ansgar for the Scandinavians. Obvious, there's a huge Scandinavian population in Minnesota. But they weren't Catholic, and they weren't going to come and pray here. So instead it got substituted for St. Therese, who was patroness of all the missions. So that's the catch-all. If your immigrant group didn't get one of the other 5, St. Therese is your gal. She's there for all the rest of us. St. John the Baptist was a substitute as well. It was originally with the Chapel of the French, with Saint Remy, the bishop who had baptized the first king of France. But then looking around, there weren't French here, other than Masquerade himself. They were French Canadians, and their patron is St. John the Baptist. And so they substituted St. John the Baptist for that. But it's part of the history of which groups were coming and all of it. So it's a fun, fun thing.
It was Ireland's way of engaging everybody, because people, as you said, there weren't Augustinian English people here. It was a waste of a saint, right? So there were French Canadians, there were Italians, and so forth, and this was his way of engaging people.
He wanted people to come and use these chapels, pray these chapels as well. The only other place, it's not a cathedral, but the only other place you have anything slightly similar to this is if you go to Washington, D.C., at the edge of the campus of Catholic University of America is the the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. You got to turn the paper sideways to have the stationery on it, right? But it has images of Our Lady from all the different immigrant groups that have come to the United States. So it has dozens and dozens of different Marian images from all the different peoples who have immigrated to America. So that would be the closest thing. And that's one of the only churches on the continent that's bigger than this one. Okay, all the way back over here now.
My question is related to the Baldacchino. It seems like there's a dome already over the altar, and it's really beautiful. And I'm wondering, what's the purpose of the Baldacchino? Because we don't see that in a lot of other churches.
What's the significance of the baldacchino over the altar?
I think it's focus. In this big church, you come in, you might not know where to look, or even in here. Where will you look? Well, you would look at the cathedra, of course, because it's all fixed up. But the baldacchino gives us this is where you're supposed to look. And of course, it achieves its purpose, at least in my mind.
And the development of this design is interesting too. London, England is slightly older than Minneapolis, St. Paul, right? But because of a guy named Henry VIII, the church had been suppressed in England for 3 centuries. So the Catholic diocese for London is called the Archdiocese of Westminster. It was erected in 1850, the same year the Diocese of St. Paul was founded.
Oh.
All right? And they were building their cathedral, Westminster Cathedral, not to be confused with Westminster Abbey, where the kings are crowned and the kings or many of them are buried and all of that. That's about 6 blocks away. But the Catholic Westminster Cathedral was being built just as this was being built. And Archbishop Ireland corresponded with the Bishop of London, of Westminster, about this baldacchino in particular. But again, that design changed over time. But a dome or a baldacchino And the interesting thing about our dome is it's over the nave. Most dome churches, the dome is over the altar, not over the nave, right? So it's a particular thing about this being what we call a Greek cross, meaning that the arms are equidistant, rather than a Latin cross where the bottom arm of the cross is much longer than the others. But being a Greek cross, usually the altar is in the middle, but they did kind of a both and. They did the Greek cross, but they still wanted to have the sanctuary at one end rather than the middle. But a dome in general and a baldachin in particular harken all the way back to the Old Testament, where it talks about God pitching his tent to dwell with his people. So there's that notion of the presence of God. And then there's a notion also, who's ever been to a Jewish wedding, right? The bride and the groom stand under a canopy, a huppah, right? A canopy. So it's both the presence of God, but it's also the covenant, a marriage covenant, Christ and his bride, the church. So all that's symbolized by a dome, and a baldachin is just another dome, as Celeste said, to provide focus to the altar right there. Okay. Oh, we have lots of good questions. Yes. Oh, you already asked. Let's get someone who's not asked over here.
I was very blessed to attend the cathedral school for the 8 years, and I'm wondering if anybody has done a history of the school.
Has anyone written a history of the cathedral school?
Not that I know of, yeah.
No. So the Archdiocesan Archives would have information about it, but to our knowledge, there's not a written history of the cathedral school. It closed in, I think, 71 or some early 70s. Okay. And then you know that across Summit here, if you go out the front, there's a flag, a small flagpole with a little marker at the bottom of it. And that is to the formation of the very first school patrol in the country.
Yes.
Right? That the sisters of St. Joseph were worried about the children coming from the cathedral school down the hill across Summit Avenue to the cathedral for Mass. And so they invented this thing called the school patrol, which now you see in all of your neighborhoods across the country, right? But that's an important part of that. Now, next year, 2025, is a jubilee year for the church, but it's also a special anniversary for our local diocese. I told you it's 1850, so 2025 is the 175th anniversary of the diocese, okay? And so there is a history book being compiled, and so that's going to have wonderful stories about all the parishes of the Archdiocese. So look for that coming. I think it's going to be ready for order at Easter time in 2025, so just a few months away.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But no comprehensive history of the school that we know of. Yeah. Okay, all right.
How is St. John Vianney associated with the Cathedral of St. Paul, and what relics do we have contained within the cathedral?
What is our connection with St. John Vianney?
Well, St. John Vianney is the patron of priests, right? And we don't have any connection that he ever visited here, but St. John Vianney, Archbishop of Ireland, went to France, and of course, the story of St. John Vianney is that, and you could correct me on this, but his bishop is supposed to have said he wasn't very bright, and the bishop is supposed to have said, well, let's just send him to some little old place. He can't do any harm. He's a good man. He's a holy man. Let's just send him to some place, and he won't do any harm. Well, of course, God showed us that, and he turned out, they said that he used to be in the confessional for 18, 20 hours a day. The King of France came to confession to him. He was a great confessor, gentle and sweet and forgiving. So again, we are confounded by the Lord.
So our first missionaries came from the same region of France, the area around Lyon in eastern France. And so that's then where John of Ireland was sent as a seminary, right? And so Vianney didn't visit us, but John Ireland visited St. John Vianney. He was an old priest then. And we know even apart from John Ireland's visit to the parish at Ars to see St. John Vianney, there would be young Frenchmen who would come to him thinking that they had a priestly vocation. And he would look at it, and some of them he would say, "You, go join the others in America," meaning here. So I always say John Vianney was our first vocations director, right? And we have the memories of those early pioneer priests, and one of them, I think it was Monsignor Boiffin, who said he was just a little boy when he visited John Vianney, and as his mother brought him up to John Vianney, the little boy says, "Mommy, how come they don't feed their priests here?" Right? And John Vianney patted him on the head, whatever. So it's wonderful stories from that first generation of French missionaries. But the window, the left window over the Selby side confessionals, you can't tell it at night, but that is the window of John Vianney, right? And then in the Founders Chapel, the relic that we have of him there is his preaching collar, right? This wonderful thing.
Right, yeah.
You see the old cassocks that the French had a special collar that looked like walrus teeth coming down. And a friend of mine, when I was here as rector before, I was an antiques dealer, and he got a shipment from Paris, and he calls me up and says, "I can't keep this. It's the collar of St. John Vianney," and so he donated it to the cathedral. So that is back there as well. So
Yes, I remember that. It's back there, yeah.
wonderful. Oh, yes, no.
I really like the story of the sailboat and the waves going all the way around. Is there any other hidden symbolism?
Can't hear you.
She appreciates the waves and even the ship over the door over there.
Yeah.
But what other symbolism is hidden in all the art around the cathedral? We actually have a whole book on this called Stone and Glass that goes through. Yeah. So if you want to comment on any of the symbolism of the art.
Well, of course, if you look in the back, the doors. Actually, you should come into the cathedral from the front. They would like to have you walk up the steps, come into the cathedral, and of course, you open the door, and opening a door is symbolic to opening to, in this case, grace, opening to forgiveness, whatever you come into the cathedral for. Most people come through the side doors, but you really should come through the back. That's, I think, part of the symbolism of that. And the four corners of the cathedral, Matthew, Mark, I think Matthew's over here.
Luke and John. Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are holding up, that's another symbol. Notice that they're in the four corners, and the gospel writers, they are holding up the four corners of the cathedral. This will not fall down because we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So there are lots of things like that that are symbolic.
Yeah, just like the Gospels are the pillars of the church because they give us the life and teaching of Jesus, so the gospel writers are the pillars here. Above them, in what we call a pendentive, that's that kind of triangular shape between the arches, right? That's a pendentive architecturally.
Yes.
Those are mosaics, so they're not painted. They're made of tens of thousands of tiny little pieces called tesserae, colored glass and colored stone. They make up images of the four cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. Because a pendentive architecturally, what it does is it's a tension point. It channels the downward thrust. All the weight of the dome comes down on that space right there. Because again, there are arches, there's empty space here. So all the weight above it has to come down there. But also arches push outwards, right? So if you looked, Celeste mentioned Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is being restored. For a while, they had to have different things pushing on it. You know, flying buttresses is the permanent way, but they had to have these things to balance the tension. An arch tends to spread, right? So these pendentives, not just it's the vertical thrust, it's the horizontal thrust that they have to balance out. So why do I say all that? Because that's what the cardinal virtues do. The tensions of our passions, the push and pull of our passions, are regulated by prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. That's how all of our push and pull of our passions get regulated, just like the architectural forces get regulated that way. I think we had a question over here.
Did Archbishop Ireland consider being interred within his beloved cathedral?
Did the Archbishop ever consider being buried at the cathedral, his beloved cathedral?
Not that I know of. Do you, Father? Yeah.
So it was actually something that I discovered late in my first term as rector. In the museum, there's a storeroom, and I'm walking through the storeroom, and all of a sudden the wall is curving. Right now, architecturally, you don't build a curved wall unless you have to. But this curved wall is right here under the nave. There's nothing above it, let alone anything that would require a curve. It was to be the apse of a crypt chapel, right? But early on, Archbishop Ireland, again, the cathedral, 1906, they started digging and laying foundations, 1907, the cornerstone. But early on, he said, I want to be buried on the prairie like a common man. And so that's why he's at Calvary Cemetery, which is only about 1.5 miles from here. But there is the outline of what that crypt chapel would be. And so my hope is that when we do the interior restoration of the cathedral, we'll actually do the crypt chapel as it should have been. And then we'll get a black carriage drawn with black horses with black plumes, and we will bring Archbishop Ireland and say, you were buried on the prairie for over a century, now you'll be buried here, right? So, but yeah, interesting little things like that I'm still discovering things about the cathedral. Why is the rose window where it is?
Well, for light is one thing, and of course, the rose window is a characteristic of all of cathedrals. It's called a rose window because it's round, and the one in the back, this one is.
Yeah, we're blessed to have 3 rose windows.
These are the North American Martyrs, and this one is the Beatitudes, and the one in the back is the Lamb of God is in the center, I think,
Apostles,
yeah. And they are were called rose windows because they're round, and of course the beautiful light comes through with all the colors. If you've ever been in the cathedral when the sun comes up and comes through that window, it's really spectacular, beautiful.
So, and if you were to ask what type of architecture this is, Masquerade at that time, he called it classical Renaissance. But this is not what we would consider classical Renaissance. You look at the great churches of Florence, Italy, the cradle of the Renaissance, this doesn't look like them, right? But he didn't have a label. What we're dealing with is 19th century, there's the Romantic movement, right? So it's in music, it's in painting, it's in architecture as well. And the most significant school of the arts at that time was the Fine Arts Academy in Paris, where Masquerade, our architect, studied. And it was called the École des Beaux-Arts.
Yes.
It simply means School of Fine Arts. Well, that school had such influence over architecture that this style is now called Beaux-Arts. That's the name of a whole architectural style from the pupils of that school in Paris. Americans went over to study there, and Masquerade was their classmate. And that's how he got to New York. Because he came back, his friends, his classmates from America said, come back here and join our firm, right? And if you read about the famous buildings of New York, the 3 great Beaux-Arts buildings of America, the monumental buildings, are the Grand Central Station, the New York Public Library, and this, right? McKim, Mead, and White was the great firm in New York. Carrier and Hastings is another one. But Masquerade practiced architecture with them, then landed in St. Louis and came upriver from there. But we would call this Beaux-Arts architecture today. And what it really means is it took elements of all different styles from different periods and threw them together in a lush, romantic, dramatic way. And that's what we have, right? The rose window is a characteristic of Gothic architecture. The dome is not, right? But you throw it all together in this lush, romantic way, and that's Beaux-Art architecture. So, all right. Was there another question? All right.
So, you know how, like, there are waves right there? And this kind of looks like a wave to me. And this. Is it supposed to look like a wave?
Yes, she's pointing out how the pew tops and ends also look like waves.
Yes.
It's all meant to.
And
very
Archbishop
observant.
Ireland actually designed those. We have records where he actually would come down and he would take two and I don't like this one, I like this one. I don't like this one, I like this one. He actually designed those. Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. Well, we don't want to tire Dr. Raspanti out. We're so grateful for sharing the wealth
Happy to
of
be
your
here.
knowledge with us and for all of your years of care of the Cathedral Archives. Let's give Dr. Raspanti a big thank you.
Thank you, Father.
We are going to erect in the Cathedral Archives a plaque in your honor.
Oh my goodness.
Thanking you for all of your work in preserving the history of this wonderful cathedral. Grazie mille.
Excuse me. I want to mention one other person who is not here. Carl Simmons was an assistant, or he worked with me. Hand and glove. The two of us worked together. He came every day. He was a retired airline pilot, and after he retired, I guess it was boring, so he was looking around for something to do, and he came to the cathedral, and we just clicked. What a wonderful man he was. I just love that man. He did so much. He reorganized. When we came into the archives, there was a table, and it was piled so high with, when people didn't know what to do with something, they would put it on that table. And if you stood on this side, you couldn't see the person on the other side. And we kept looking over the table, and one by one, Carl, so we should remember Carl Simmons. What a wonderful, wonderful man he was, yes.
Grateful to Carl and to you for all of
Thank
your
you.
love
Thank
and
you.
care for this great place and to
Thank
share
you.
its riches with us. So, thank you. And we have some flowers to present to you.
Thank you so
very
much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We mentioned Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. It reopens in about 3 weeks. After that devastating fire 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, it will be once again reopened on December 8th, sorry. But as you know, that fire damages cathedrals, so does water. And if you look up, you see damage line. So please help pray that we'll be able to someday restore our great cathedral as well. And if any of you are retired and looking for things to do, there's work in the archives or the museum or being a docent to give tours of the cathedral. So just ask the Holy Spirit to show you how you can help out. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for being here. God bless you all.